Warning, this podcast contains blasphemy, heresy, and profanity. Proceed at your own risk.
'Cause I'm exactly where I want to be. Yeah, I'm a sinner through and through. And I'll be waiting in hell for you.
Welcome to the Skeptical Satanists.
Alright, so I have Ash on the show once again. It's good to have you back on. Glad to finally get you back on. So how have you been?
I've been okay, just living my best life, raising a kid, got remarried, just living deliciously, you know?
So last time I had you on, it's been a while, I know we went over Satanism a bit and everything, and you being chapter head of TST, or maybe you've become that since then? Can't remember. It's been a while. But,
That's correct.
yeah. But you also have a background in psychology that we didn't get to really go into then. Perhaps you've advanced upon since the last time we've talked.
Yes. I graduated with my master's in 2018, and I'm currently working on a doctoral degree in behavioral health management. So things like clinical directors and people running clinics, and kind of the business and the part that everybody kind of looks over when they think of mental health clinic.
Okay. So, like, this has been a curiosity of mine, and, like, working through my own shit and everything that I've had, the trauma and stuff from childhood, and the church that I grew up in and everything, I'd started going down this it was just rabbit hole after rabbit hole of things pertaining to, like, personality disorders, and behavioral issues, and things, my own behavioral issues, and things that I had adopted from a narcissistic parent, which I do want to do an episode on that with you for Mother's Day at some point.
Oh, I'd love
yeah, we don't have to go too in depth into any of that right now. But personality disorders in general, I know I've been told that there's 6 characteristics of personality disorders. I don't know if maybe you go off of a different. I know that it's all like it kind of depends on what you're reading on the stuff, because it's characterized in different ways. But what's your understanding of personality disorders, and what would distinguish a personality disorder from behavioral issues?
Well, that's a very complex question. Before I go on to answer that, I gotta say I'm not licensed and I'm not going to diagnose anybody. I have the minimal credentials, but I currently don't have an LPC or anything like that. However, I do teach on some of the stuff during my intro and abnormal psych classes that I do with college students, and I have a very basic kind of understanding of that while also working in a clinical setting. So a personality disorder, as I personally teach it, is characterized heavily by a very long-standing and of, well, generally behaving. Because ultimately personality, just as a definition according to modern psych, is a very long-standing, endearing, and idiosyncratic pattern of behavior. If somebody kicks a puppy, don't kick puppies, guys. Somebody goes out and kicks a puppy one day, that's not enough to say something about their personality. They might be a bit of an asshole, yes. But what if it's only a one-time incident? What if somebody goes out every single day of their life, kicks puppies, mistreats their co-workers, mistreats their spouse, their children, engages in things like theft, general unreliability, a very grandiose ego without anything to show for it, promiscuity, risky behaviors, maybe they have a criminal record? That would be a good case for an antisocial personality disorder, meaning your traditional psychopath, sociopath. So it's not that they're a psycho killer or anything. That can come with it. But if somebody generally exhibits a lack of remorse consistently past the age of 18 and engages in what we dub antisocial contact so frequently that this is a staple of who they are, then that's more likely to be a personality disorder. Everybody's going to engage in, say, an antisocial action here and there. If we're frustrated, if we're mad. But the key difference between somebody just being an asshole in the moment and a full-bore personality disorder is time and consistency. Behavioral issues do generally go into personality disorders because they are largely learned disorders. Take your cluster B, your emotional dramatic category of personality, for example. In many cases, according to the research, a lot of people who suffer from something like borderline, histrionic, antisocial, or narcissistic personality tend to come from very deprived backgrounds. Maybe there's not a lot of emotional warmth. Maybe their father or mother was a criminal. Maybe they were physically abused as a child. That tends to be a very common trait. Kids are sponges and they learn this behavior over time. Once it sticks and becomes consistent to the point of interfering with a person's job, their health, their normal relationships, and daily functioning, that's when we consider it a disorder. There's a very fine line between a single behavior and a long-term pattern. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, and whenever I think of this stuff, I think of, like, a lot of times, like, we hear these terms used so frequently in daily life, and how people will just casually use the term narcissist, or use the term schizo, or psycho, or, things like that.
Don't even get started.
People use these terms so casually and everything, and they don't seem to realize or look into these things enough to understand that there's things that are taken whenever those terms are used in psychology. It's a completely different thing than what's been used colloquially. Like the DSM-5 defines these things out, and it's kind of the standard for psychological diagnosis on these disorders and things.
Yeah.
I do, like I said, does this, do you find this confusion a lot in psychology itself? Does this other language that is outside of psychology seep its way in here and there in therapists and things like that?
Oh yeah, on a very societal level too. Let me use the most easy example that's culturally relevant. The word triggered. Oh no. So, what a trigger means clinically is something that when somebody has PTSD, maybe say they've suffered years and years of sexual abuse, and one of their really bright memories is being abused while a certain song plays. When that song plays years and years down the line, it immediately triggers a flight or fight response. Same concept as a war veteran hearing fireworks or a car engine backfire. It's an involuntary response that the brain makes to try to protect that individual from further harm. However, in this day and age, in our little culture war and the internet, people think that this means offended. And they've used it so flippantly that we actually have veterans and young men with really severe diagnosable PTSD become completely resistant to getting help because they don't want to feel sensitive. We've created this politicized culture around that specific term to the point where it's absolutely bastardized, and they don't even want to say that word in a clinical setting because of what they've read in forums and things like that, and it's particularly seen among men.
I think it's terrible also the way that, like, a lot of people, even people that that aren't necessarily Christian, will label things as evil. And it just gets, I think it's the thing, at least what I've noticed, it seems to be this thing of, like, they don't want to imagine this thing being human. That humans are capable of this thing. Because that means, well, they're human, so they can relate to that. They don't want to be able to relate to that. So they push it out. And things like the more extreme versions of things like narcissism, or like psychotic episodes, or like murderers or things like that, people don't want to relate to those things. And I think that's a very dangerous thing in itself, that people want to coin these terms like that, or push these things like evil, and they are doing this thing and they don't consciously know it, but they're putting it into a supernatural state. And psychology is the study of human behaviors. So, like, these aren't outside of humanity. Science itself is the study of nature. This isn't outside of nature. This is something that we're studying, we're able to study, and we're able to understand. But whenever we put these terms on that, it's just like this thing of faith that just stunts all kinds of questioning. And I think that's a shame. I've run into so many people like that, even on just little threads and stuff on Facebook and everything, where they act like they think that they know they kind of use these little psychological terms like we're talking about, and it's just bastardized. It's out of context to what's actually happening in the situations.
I agree completely. I mean, psych, especially inpatient psychiatry, is definitely not for the lighthearted. You're going to meet literal murderers. You're going to meet people who have abused children sexually. You're going to see people overdose. There'll be a day on the unit you'll walk in and there's naked people, and you have to just poker face it. You're going to see violence, homelessness, a lot of the social intersections of poverty and mental health. You're going to have to talk people through a psychotic break, see suicide attempts, and occasionally you're going to see the deaths of your friends and people you knew. It's a very taxing line of work. People don't want to believe that such scary ideas are so close to home with them. They all want to think of some magical, shadowy QAnon cabal, and Satanists controlling the government, or there's an adrenochrome ring, and Pizzagate, and child molesters, and stuff like that. They have all these wild fantasies that they just dub as evil, when in reality, it's probably Billy Joe Bob of the fucking holler who's probably wanted to diddle your kids.
Yeah.
And they don't want to accept that it's people they know, people they've trusted, and one day it could be them in a psychiatric unit. We're all a couple decisions away from shitting in a bucket. That's how I put it.
Yeah.
I've met people who've killed by accident in an act of self-defense and lost their mind over it. I've met real, everyday people who've done horrible, horrible things. They weren't Norman Bates or Adolf Hitler. They were average people, and that's what scares people.
Even then, like these horrible atrocities, murders, and rape, and everything for that matter, like that. But we take those things, and like I said, when people put this evil label on it, they just want to shut it out. Just kill the person. Well, just, do away with them, and that'll solve it. But obviously that isn't solving anything. We've been doing that for millennia. So,
really?
Yeah, so, like, to me, it's, I can't get to that point. It's like, no, we need to look at this a little bit more rationally, because we can study these people, and we can try to figure out, what is causing this.
Oh, yeah.
And with that, the more that we advance in psychology and in science and everything, maybe we'll be able to come up with some preventative actions or something that will teach us about how to prevent these things from happening in the future, whether that's while the person's still a child, that maybe it's certain things attributing to that, or whatever, if it's medication or if it's whatever that could help these people.
I agree completely. One of the reasons I think people are so quick to say, oh, put a bullet in them, call it evil. I'm not saying it isn't wrong, but the thing is that if you look at human cognition, people don't like to think. I hate to put it like that, but they don't.
Yeah.
Everybody wants the simplest possible answer, and people have a need for what we call cognitive closure. What this means is people don't like to say, I don't know. Rather than investigate any of it, like scientifically, and use good epistemology, it's much faster, and much more comforting for the brain to jump to the simplest possible answer, whether it's blame the magic man in the sky or blame the devil for perfectly human actions. It fulfills a need for answers. It's why many Christian apologists absolutely hate it. When an atheist will say, I don't know, people would rather make up something or pretend to know the answer rather than admit they don't know. It's far more comforting.
The other thing is that there seems to be this misunderstanding of psychology having like the people that are out there saying, well, psychology doesn't have the answers for things, or they don't know. They don't know. We don't know everything there is about the brain. We don't know everything there is about all of us, so we can't know. And they're, it's bullshit.
No. Those types. Psychology does face a lot of scrutiny like that, as it should, as any science should, because it can withstand that. Just because we don't know everything about the brain yet doesn't mean that the hours and countless amounts of money we've spent on research and all of the collective body of papers that have actually been published are somehow invalid. If more information comes into the picture that changes the paradigm, then that scientific model will go where the evidence leads. It's why we don't lock people up in asylums anymore or trephinate them to let the demons out of their brain. We have to look at the numbers, the evidence, and what the current models say. And if something challenges that, then awesome. Go publish your research, get a Nobel Prize is what I'd like to say to them. If they were to disprove evolution, for example, then they'd be one of the most famous people in the world. But instead they resort to word games and apologetics websites.
The funny thing is that these people don't seem to understand that we do know more than what they seem to think. Like, we have reasons for things. We have studied the brain to a certain degree, and we do understand how it works up to a certain degree.
Oh yeah.
But I've read about like amygdala responses and how that kind of gets processed in the brain and how it relates, like when you were talking about triggers and everything, how memories can even be stored in not just in the sense of what we would normally think of memories as, but in the sense of emotions. And certain things can trigger that in our brains to bring that back as a response. Usually from something very traumatic and everything that you've been through. But it might not even be, like you said, it might not even be tied to the exact thing. It isn't that music or whatever that is hurting that kid or that's hurting that adult later on. It's the emotions and things attached to that. I found that all pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah. I could go so deep into some of this stuff.
And people don't seem to realize too that a lot of the things that are caused by PTSD and everything aren't really curable by medication.
They're not.
It can help. Medication can help people to kind of slow down in the moment, I would say, and work through things, but it needs to be worked through. It's not going to
cure it.
Right. It's one of those things that it's almost like a Pavlovian response in a way.
It is. Exactly.
Your brain has learned how to react to this certain thing from being put under that situation early on, and it's stuck. And the only way to treat that is to kind of insert other Pavlovian things, or get your brain used to other things, or thinking of other things while you're in that mindset. Slowing those things down to be able to think them through.
Part of the reason PTSD can be so destructive, you gotta look at evolutionary history. We may not have claws or really sharp teeth, or we can't run like a cheetah, we don't have the eye of the tiger necessarily. I don't know, you might after a few energy drinks, I don't know. But if you look at humans evolutionarily, the human's greatest strength is pattern recognition and the ability to learn from the environment, along with traveling in large groups and being a social animal. we tend to learn better than many creatures. We tend to have a greater ability to reason. So, when you have a human that's just been subjected to trauma over and over and over again, it's nothing that you can do when you have a trigger necessarily. You can take your medication, but if you look at the neuroscience and evolution behind it, it's simply the brain being hardwired to do what it thinks it needs to do to survive. I mean, if you go back and look at the African savannah, you saw one of your friends get their heads torn off by a lion yesterday. So you hear rustling in the bush. Certain hormones and neurotransmitters are going to kick in. You don't have to really think rationally in that moment. The brain wants you to get out.
Well, that's the thing too, that those hormones and neurotransmitters, like you're saying, it's those things play into the fight or flight responses with the anxiety and the depression and the paranoia and things of that nature. That works directly against like the hormones that are helping you keep out of that state of mind. So if you've been, subdued to these things or subjected to these things early on in life, and that your brain has gotten used to this certain pattern of behavior or the pattern of going into that amygdala response right away rather than going to like the prefrontal cortex and going in that way of being able to think things through a bit more.
Oh yeah, generally you only use the most primal and basic needs when you're in that kind of response. The digestion slows, the heart rate increases, the pump blood to the muscles. Like, there's a whole cascade of responses that happen, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, and in today's society, it isn't necessarily the having to deal with vicious animals every day, or the forager days. It's not so much of that anymore, but we still have those things in our brain.
Oh yeah,
and it's just we're reacting to other things around us in our environment the same way. It's amazing some of the stuff people overlook like this, that to get a good understanding of what's going on with you, I think it's a good idea when working through different trauma and things. I know even a lot of, like, the therapists that I went to, some of them were just, they wanted to push medication, and that was it. You graduated therapy once they got you on medication, and, you were doped up and feeling good. But, just like we were saying, yeah, that's fine. You've got your serotonin, dopamine levels up and everything feels great, but that still doesn't change whenever those responses kick in again.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't matter anymore. It's going to cut those things off, and it's just a matter of time before your brain, adapts to the medication and stuff as well. And I think that's, at least from what I've read and everything, it seems to be what happens. And I think that's a lot of issues that we have in this country, is that people are relying on medication too much. And that's not to say that medication doesn't have its place in it. Like I said, I think it's helpful in certain situations. With personality disorders, are they treatable or curable?
Not necessarily. Let's take one of the most complicated disorders in the DSM, borderline personality. Usually this kind of a disorder is characterized by kind of a cascade of commonalities. It's in the dramatic and emotional cluster, along with the antisocial, narcissistic, and histrionic, part of the reason it's so stigmatized. But borderline patients often suffer from kind of a fleeting sense of identity or an uncertainty. They tend to make very impulsive decisions that can often get them in danger. And they tend to exhibit suicidality, substance abuse, and a large amount of manipulation frequently. They often have very unstable personal relationships as a result, too. A lot of the research currently has shown that it tends to arise. It's more common among women than men, but it does exist in men. It does tend to arise from childhood abuse situations. A lot of the people I've met with borderline on a unit tend to come from such destructive backgrounds with such a manipulative parent that they start mimicking a lot of the behavior. they start acting out by maybe cutting. That's not everything that cutting is. That's a totally different discussion. But maybe they resort to suicidality or substance abuse or like really risky promiscuous sex constantly to the point where it's destructive. A lot of people with that kind of a disorder tend to learn how to manipulate the environment, not always in the most ethical way. So in inpatient settings, you see a lot of superficial cutting, a lot of suicide threats, immense displays of emotionality, a lot of behavioral challenges, getting along with other patients. But that kind of a disorder is so complicated, I couldn't tell you every in and out. But it's not necessarily curable. What you can do for a disorder like BPD is a lot of therapy tends to work the best according to studies, specifically dialectical behavior therapy. It's very complicated type of talk therapy they do. It takes years and years because borderline's very serious. But the therapist might start asking them to evaluate their actions in the moment or learn some kind of emotional control as well. It's very tailored to the individual usually and helps them address negative emotions they might not be able to manage very well and address certain behavioral components so they can have a more healthy way of functioning. Because borderline is going to impact work, friendships, relationships, etc. It's something that usually causes distress, whether or not they know they have a problem. So talk therapy would be really good for borderline personality. If you have something completely different out of the personality disorders range and into actual psychiatric issues, not to say that personality isn't significant, but if we're looking at a purely biological disorder, let's take schizophrenia, for example. Schizophrenia, with full-bore audio, visual hallucinations, delusions, odd affect, kind of inappropriate emotions.
Sounds like religion.
We can get into that.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, you made me laugh. Religious preoccupation does tend to come with the psychotic episodes as well, but we'll get into that.
Okay.
So if you're looking at an actual, just pure schizophrenia patient, no mood disorder with it, anything like that, there's no amount of talk therapy I can do with you when you're in a full-bore psychosis. If you're ranting about the aliens and the government and the little green men, or just wild, bizarre, very out there stuff, or super paranoid, I can't say anything. I can't fight the delusion. It's like, okay, we need to get you stabilized before we start you on talk therapy. Might give them some patient education once they're stable, get them on the right kind of antipsychotic, kind of slow down that thinking a bit, make them a bit more sensible. Then we can really start to do talk therapy. But it's just very dangerous in the moment to fight the delusion, so to speak, especially if it leads to medication non-compliance. So different disorders are going to have different ways of treating and mitigating negative symptoms.
Curious about NPD too, and how it well, like, from my understanding, there's no real sense of being wrong or anything, or holding themselves accountable. There's no sense of self really to be able to evaluate. So how is there anything that can be done for people in that situation?
With a full-bore, like, NPD diagnosis?
Yeah.
That, I'm just going to be frank with you, I'm going to have to do a little bit of research into.
Okay.
But chances are you'd want to go the therapy route. But these types of clients almost never present voluntarily.
Right.
Because part of the condition, they don't think they have a problem, or they're unassailable or afraid of criticism.
That's what I'm getting at. It's weird that they've even been studied at all for that reason.
Oh yeah, or more common in prisons too.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, you have this subset that ends up in prisons, along with the antisocial kind of characters. But more often than not, the really high-functioning people you often see in media, politics, the government, in high-ranking positions in business because they've learned a way to sublimate all of their tendencies into something society needs. Not that society needs more politicians, but we won't have that discussion.
Right.
Like, can you imagine Donald Trump presenting the therapy? That's never going to happen.
Right.
Now tell me what a very stable genius I am.
So, shifting gears a little bit, I kind of wanted to talk about your transitioning with whatever you feel comfortable with talking about.
I'm open.
I know you've been in the media lately. We don't have to get into too many specifics or anything. Whatever you're able to, discuss, I'm happy with.
You're good.
But I wanted to follow up on some things with that. Just last time you were on, I believe you were early in your transitioning and everything. And I happened to catch you while you were coming through town. It was good to have you on. But I've got so many questions and things I want to go over.
This would be like multiple episodes of me because I talk much.
We'll try to fit some in here.
You good?
But I'm curious how, before you transitioned, your views of toxic masculinity and how much you saw before transitioning and after, if you've seen the same types of things, or maybe that you see them in a different light now, or you see them, or maybe you're being treated differently and see it in a different way now than you did before.
Oh, I have countless examples of this. Honestly, I was far more toxic before transitioning. I still have some traits, kind of like the really toxic man, never ask for help, hard drinking, hard fucking kind of guy. Just no room for sensitivity. Honestly, that's eased up a lot now that I'm far more comfortable with myself. One of the things I've consistently noticed as a trans man who passes flawlessly in public, I've noticed women, like, I'll compliment them on their boots or something and mean nothing by it, because ask me here. They will immediately get this look of fear, and I never quite figured it out until somebody said, oh, they think I'm hitting on them? I'm like, oh, no, I'm just out, so I'll insert, oh, my husband would think those were cute as hell, and you see their just face wash over relief.
Yeah.
It makes me really sad. Another thing I've noticed is that men think they can make sexist jokes about you, or it's like, oh, those women better get in the kitchen, yee. I'm just like, oh, please shut up. And you just stop, and it's like, no, dude, that's not okay.
I've dealt with a lot of that shit on construction sites and everything as well. Listening to this stupid shit. I mean, I'll usually speak up and say something and embarrass the fuck out of them, but it's one of those things, like you see it so much around you, and then you understand why women are so defensive or kind of have a wall up, like they almost need to. And there's been so many relationships that I've been in where that women were they were abused or they were sexually assaulted, and like the shit doesn't get reported as much as what people think it does. And I think that's a big issue with men, that they don't think of that either a lot of times before they open their fucking mouths. Like it's really a terrible thing. And going into like the LGBTQ community, that's another thing that toxic masculinity tends to kind of go into as well, that these toxic men are usually bullying these people that are different than them. Because, the toxic masculine person is usually the straight, man that he don't want any cocks. He's scared to death of cocks.
Won't even wipe his own ass.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but yet he's so concerned about what everyone else's cock is doing. So it's just so backward in itself,
It's like projection in a weird way. I often find that those men have the most fragile egos, or their masculinity and sense of self is so assailable that one little breath near it and it'll blow over. You just see them go nuclear.
So have you seen more of that or less of that since transitioning? Have you seen more of that attitude or less, about the same, or just it's maybe towards you more personal now. I don't know how to...
Oh, men, just average cis men, Billy Joe Bob, walking down the street is far more... You can tell they're put off by you very quickly. Especially when you, like, hold your husband's hand or show emotion.
Yeah.
It's like you see their world kind of crashing down a bit. It's so bizarre. I'm just like, okay. The heteros are upsetteros.
Tell them you're trans, their whole head just fucking explodes.
Like, it's serious. I can't tell you how many frat boys, how many Catholic priests, like, old white men message me out of curiosity. They're just like, I'm just curious. But they won't say it to anybody else. They'll have, like, transphobic shit on their profile, but in the meantime, they're sending you dick pics.
Wow.
I mean, thank you for the pic, but they just know you're gay and you're a man with different plumbing. So you'd be shocked about how, like, excited they get when nobody's looking. So it's like, oh, I can talk to you like another guy. Oh, if only women were like this. So it's so weird.
I've seen these things too with people like Joe Rogan, where they kind of insert this fucking, when it comes to sports and shit, and that trans people shouldn't be in sports, or that they should have all these specific rules for them, or they should be they aren't really in there, they aren't this gender or that. Have you experienced a lot of people that have an ignorance when it comes to knowing the difference between gender and biological sex, and having an understanding of those things to begin with, or...
Most of the people that actually talk to me IRL are just honestly curious and don't mean harm.
Yeah.
Online, they lose their ever-loving mind and just resort to taunting than listening, so they're not worth entertaining generally.
Right.
I've got these couple of trolls that I blocked ages ago. Kind of this really weird, like, socially rejected in the gay community for reasons you will soon understand. I call them the TERF twins. So one of them is an incel gay guy who cannot get any... He's mean, he's negative, he's a contrarian in every capacity, just has a spoiled, haughtier, holier-than-thou attitude. He got so angry when he saw me on Grindr. He's just, like, making all these jokes about Ash is a throat and a conversion therapist. This is homophobic. Only real gay men like penis. I don't know what he's on about. He just stalked me for months, just leaving comments where he got eviscerated on my Facebook. I eventually blocked him because it just turned into flat out harassment and the T-slur.
Yeah.
Because he was losing an argument. Dude is on straight up TERF forums and proud. He's like, cis is a slur. We've got women infiltrating the gay community. I'm like, dude, you know I have a penis, right? And they're like, the trans people are gonna get us. They're out. It's actually just wild, like Alex Jones-esque shit. I'm just fascinated. I'm like, sir, you commented here, and you lost an argument where I was being civil with you, despite calling me slurs. What did you think would happen? It's like, it's basically the trans Illuminati is out to get him. So him and this, like...
Is it an overly Christian guy, too? I mean, is it... No? Really?
Not.
That's interesting, because I was that way before, but I don't know. I guess it seems just a lack of fucking logic and reason that these people have that's in common more than anything.
Oh, the dude is actually pretty intelligent. He's got talent there, but just a shit attitude.
Yeah.
And that's where he started getting rejected for the right reasons, because he treats people like garbage.
All right.
Couldn't find dates, became an outcast in the community. But him and his really narrow-minded lesbian friend, she now votes Republican strictly to spite the trans people. And I'm just like...
That's what I'm saying, though. I don't see that as logical or rational in any form.
I don't understand it.
I mean, it's just a lack of fucking empathy, of respect for people in general.
I just told the dude, it's like, look, You don't want to fuck a trans guy? Don't fuck a trans guy. Consent is sexy.
Right.
I wasn't interested in you if you were the last man on earth, is what I told him.
Worry about your own cock.
He's just obsessed with the idea that trans people want to fuck him. And that he's going to be forced into liking man pussy. I'm just like, no, nobody said you had to. Then don't hit on me then. Shit. I'm not going to just slide in your DMs and climb in your window, snatch your people up. I mean, you do you, buddy. I ain't going to ask you to like me. But he's like, just insistent that I want to fuck him. I'm like, so this is projection of the highest magnitude. I'm like, is something you're trying to tell me?
I mean,
it's weird.
As somebody that was previously Christian and everything myself, dude, whenever I'd first met you, I'd been out of Christianity for a few years, I think, and I'd kind of went down the path of humanism and skepticism and things of that nature. I was an atheist at that point. Before that, I was very much an ignorant piece of shit. Like, not to put myself down that much, but it was, it is what it is. Like I said, a lot of shit I was basing things on was based on faith. It was based on the shit I was raised in, the shit environment I was raised in, as far as that's concerned. And that's not an excuse, but it's
it explains it.
Yeah, but like, you became an inspiration for me while finding Satanism, dude.
You.
I'd found so much confusion while watching you transition. Like, I still didn't understand the things real well, and
it's okay.
Confusion for myself, just seeing someone find joy in things that I found an annoyance in as a man, and like the facial hair, pimples, and the urges, and just the mental fuckery of testosterone and everything,
Hence why I have a kid now.
But it made me happy seeing you take so many things in stride, and even find, like, joy in those things. That was crazy to me. It was really an incredible thing, like, to witness, and, like, it was an honor to get to be your friend through the whole thing. But to see you go through all of that, and to come out on the other side, it's like, oh, hey, there you are, like, there's my friend. And, like, an unveiling, or, like, an uncovering, more than a transition, really. It was eye-opening. And, even though, like, I had worked through a lot of my bigoted biases and things by that time, I met you, and seeing all you'd been through and everything, and being lucky enough to be your friend and get to witness it in person and everything,
Make me cry.
really ate through any biases that I may have had left at that point. And
I'm
I wish
glad
I wish more people took the time to get to know and understand one another, instead of just inserting their own thoughts and shit for people, or accusing people of shit without ever trying to question or truly get to understand the person. And I mean, I think that sums up a lot of the issues in our country now that we face. And I know you've seen a lot of backlash, like, in the news and stuff.
It's okay.
And
Most entertaining.
It's just, it infuriates me, though, being somebody that grew up in that, and knowing that rhetoric, and knowing that shit that happened. It's fucking terrible. And I don't know. I like I said, I wish it's almost the same thing that narcissism has going for it, that it's almost defined by not recognizing those things, by them never self-assessing or taking the time to even consider that they might be wrong, or try to question their reasons for these things that they're saying or that they're feeling or whatever.
Especially when they find ways to try to say, oh, my kid should be taken, and this and that, and this is an abomination. It's like, wait, you said you were pro-life. I will know I had some gay sex, heaven forbid. And I did what I thought was the moral thing to do.
Right.
Because I wanted a kid, and let the other guy off the hook, because that's what he wanted, and that's his choice. Just the mental gymnastics people perform, and personally attacking a fucking baby, over her race and parentage. I'm like, how the hell did she know?
Yeah.
Like, she didn't have to be here. Like, leave her alone. Criticize me if you're going to criticize somebody.
But that's where you can tell that there's no there's no rationale or there's no logic behind what they're fucking saying at that point. They've resorted to ad hominems. They've resorted to logical fallacies at this point.
And insulting an infant.
Yeah.
Which is disgusting in and of itself, but I mean, especially with the ongoing culture war and the culture of outrage, something as simple as somebody who's capable of having a kid, having a family, they will look for reasons to be angry. We're the latest folk devil. It's been Satanists, it's been Muslims, it's been Jews at some point, it's been African Americans, Japanese during World War II, you name it. When one folk devil runs out, they will move on to the next one. And now it's trans people. They're gonna sit around pushing the narrative that, oh, doctors are handing out hormones like it's candy, which never happened in this fucking reality. There are so many legal clearances you generally have to go through, and thousands spent in bills, and just proving that you're a good candidate is something a lot of people face. But they want to sit there and convince themselves that, oh no, I'm gonna catch the gay. I'm like, no, we don't recruit. You're the ones knocking on my door every Sunday. I didn't spread the good word of double mastectomies and testosterone injections for the rest of your life. That's on you if you want to make up fantasies about us. I was in pain so bad that I had to make it end one way or another after 30 years of living with it. I chose to be there for my child and do what was necessary. Who cares if it's not an ideal situation? Would you rather that kid have a dead parent and not exist? Or would you rather her be with two loving dads? It's what they will never ever think about. They get so hung up on itty bitty little traditions, edicts, and commandments that they don't see humanity anymore.
The funny thing is, or the sad part is, that these people that are saying these things, that are hurtful and everything, and saying that you're trying to say that you're a bad parent for, making decisions for yourself that ultimately makes you a better parent, but they're taking these things and then ignoring the shit that they're doing. Like the corporal punishment and stuff most of these fucking people are implementing, or the religious trauma they're putting their kids through. That is way more fucking hurtful than having two loving fucking dads, And
oh no, explaining trans people to them.
Right.
Heaven forbid. But they'll sit there and threaten their children. Comply, or you will have a fate worse than death.
Yeah.
That goes on for eternity because God loves you.
Yeah, I mean, what do we call that in court? Duress, right? If I told somebody that I got this burning fucking pit out back that I'm gonna shove you in if you don't do what I say.
Yeah.
That's acting under duress. You are being threatened with torture at that point. Yeah. And yet, this is okay because it's a religion.
God is just a mob boss, but the mob boss is more moral because the punishment ends. There's only so many fingers they can cut off you.
Yeah.
But God will have you writhing and barbecuing for eons and eons. There's no lesson, no way to get out of the punishment. You just didn't love him enough.
Yeah.
What kind of fuckery is this? But oh no, trans people are bad for the children they choose to have. Oh, got it. But
well, you were talking about religion relating to these mental disorders and things as well. Would you like to go into that now with some of that?
I'd have to look up formal statistics before I give any formal numbers. On average, I know religious people do tend to have a higher propensity towards mental illness or suggestibility, as well as different thought and brain patterns as well. I was reading some studies about conservative voters and cognitive habits, for example. That does tend to cross over into religion. I'm not going to be one of these people who says religion is a mental illness automatically out the gate, just being pragmatic and what I see in a clinical setting. However, it can be a symptom of psychosis. Specifically, we call this religious preoccupation in a clinical setting. It's not enough that somebody goes to chapel every Sunday, wears a cross, and reads a Bible. There's a difference between being the average Baptist or church-going family versus dunking people's head in the psych ward water fountain because you think you're Moses and you have special powers and won't shut up about revelations 5 hours a day while making no sense and are completely delusional. That's a pretty big warning sign of psychosis, is that kind of magical thinking. So, I mean, ultimately...
If that magical thinking wasn't already there, would they just cling to something else at that point?
Yeah,
Okay.
usually ideas about the government, aliens, usually the weird Illuminati conspiracy stuff, like very Alex Jones vibes. Like, I've seen people get violent over it, too. Sometimes it's witches coming after them, just very fantastical elements. So, we don't usually define... This is kind of a weird situation with religion. While the idea of God is generally unfounded, specifically the Christian God and many others, they're all pretty equally not likely to exist, in my opinion. And just based on basic epistemology.
Except for the cargo cults. That God is definitely real, but not a god.
So, that is a pretty... God in America and many other societies is a culturally predominant belief. That's not enough to say that somebody is flat out delusional, even if it's a common, very nonsensical or fantastical belief. It's basically a socially acceptable delusion. But it has such a weird relationships with psychiatry. I'd have to really get into this and find a few studies and bring it up on a podcast. But there is kind of a huge difference in an actually delusional person who's like exhibiting full-born psychosis, needs to go to the hospital, and somebody who's just think God loves them a bit more, isn't having any other symptoms, and joining church. It's kind of the same ethical principle as, I don't know, let's say we go to a tribal society in Africa or Papua New Guinea, and there is somebody in the tribe who sees spirits, talks in nonsense, or has really odd behaviors that meet the definition of schizophrenia. It would be completely unethical to put them on a plane and take them to an American psychiatric unit where, when they're actually functioning in that society, they're well respected and they're a shaman out there. That would be completely unethical. The reason being is because a psychiatric disorder is usually flagged by several different things. Deviance, yes, that's a part of it, but deviance isn't enough to commit somebody. Lady Gaga wearing a meat dress, or Ash being a weirdo, isn't enough to lock me up. So you have to have deviancy, distress, dysfunction. There's a couple others. Usually a danger to others or self, and an inability to just function in that kind of society that you're living in.
You have to be an American.
Yeah, well, the DSM is written from a very Western perspective,
Right.
in accordance with modern psychiatry. Yeah, you could totally have somebody in sub-Saharan Africa who's a shaman but literally meets the schizophrenia diagnosis and could be treated. But the thing is, they're an elder and a religious leader there. That society is accepting of them, and they're not going to have difficulty finding work, anything like that. However, if you're running around the streets of Huntington or New York City talking about the deities that speak to you at night and the ghosts, or flailing your arms or acting
Albert
odd.
Fish shit.
So if you're
Yeah.
acting like Fish in the middle of New York City, are you going to be able to have a job that meets your basic needs? No. Might
Well,
you be a
did.
danger to yourself or others? Oh, well, I mean, we'll have to go into
Yeah,
a case
right.
study. But schizophrenia in this kind of a cultural context is going to be distressing, dysfunctional, and just not conducive to happiness or health. So we usually offer medications and therapy to kind of help them cope with their condition. Not to make them the same as everybody else necessarily, but religion's kind of the same principle. We can't just take every Southern Baptist minister and put them in Bateman. I'm sure they'd get their private jets into the building somehow. I'm joking, but
Well,
it's generally the same concept.
I mean, it's a joke, but it's also something that's pretty prevalent too in the U.S. Is I mean, that's another aspect that I see of the environment that we're in here, like having to do with mental disorders and stuff as well. The bootstrapping, the corporate capitalism that plays into those things, and that is almost cultish in its own way. I mean, even some of these big corporations, if you go to work for them, they'll give you the little video of welcome to our little group thing, and your family here. You know,
Always
shit
a red
like
flag
that.
for me.
Yeah, and it is for
Let's
me
get
too.
the party before you put us in guillotines.
Yeah, it's
Basically, bootstraps is just gaslighting in capitalist
Yeah.
society.
yeah, exactly. So it's no wonder to me why we have so many issues that we have here. With those things being implemented, as well as the religion thing, where Christianity had been the majority of this country for the longest time. I believe it still is, but it's at least went down some.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's, to me, it made sense to me when Trump got into office. That wasn't something that was some big surprise to me. Like, I was worried about that shit. I was honestly worried about that shit whenever it was happening. Because I saw churches like I grew up in, I know that they're all around this fucking area. And that they're all around the rural areas, these little churches where there's more churches than there are anything else in the town. I mean, I'm talking, we had maybe a population of over 1,000, maybe a couple thousand if you're lucky in this little town. And we had 6, 8 churches in that town, 1 gas station, and a store. Like, that's it. Like,
Where am I going to buy my liquor, though?
We didn't even have any stoplights.
That's bizarre.
So, like, seeing that, and then seeing, after Trump, seeing how many people had voted for him, and then knowing that the majority of these people were Christians, that there is this strong Christian presence still here, and that people have tried to kind of muddy the waters on and said, well, not all Christians are like that, but they're following the same book, and like, sure as fuck, almost, half of the country fucking wanted to vote this asshole in again.
Yeah. I'd love to go into some of the history of the religious right next episode, and how did Christianity become tied to culture wars and republicanism.
Yeah.
Go back to the Jerry Falwells and the Moral Majority and the Billy Grahams and Ted Haggards. Who got caught with a callboy doing meth.
I'd like to go into that, and also like the aspects of narcissism in religion as well. Theremin Trees goes into all of those videos that Theremin Trees has on narcissism are really interesting.
I love his work.
Yeah.
He just puts it in a way that's so easy to understand.
Right.
You definitely want to link him in the comments.
Yeah, I'll have to. I'll link him, and then I'll try to link in recoveringfromreligion.org and seculartherapy.org for people that are coming out of religion or trying to find answers, and because that's something that speaks to me a good bit, coming out of religion and having to go and sort out everything afterwards. It's a lot.
Yeah, and my personal Satanism, like I know even as an atheist, I have cognitive tendencies that make me very prone to ritualistic behaviors and rigidity. So knowing that works very well on me, I'm just like, okay, so how do I have religious views and embrace my need for symbolism and ritual without believing in absolute bullshit?
See, it's strange. It's strange for me because I don't have any real desire for those things.
You don't have to have
but
Satan.
I do. I appreciate the art, the art of it. I guess more than anything, I like it. I appreciate it and everything, but it's not something that gives me some kind of. I mean, I guess it's satisfying to do those things and everything, but it's not like a main staple for me in my view of things, or how Satanism is for me personally. Yes.
Oh yeah, it's very individualistic. There's no mandates on whether you should do a ritual or not. I just happen to enjoy it.
Right.
I tend to be very prone to theatrics and do things very ritualistically, hence part of my autism spectrum disorder.
I do like the togetherness and everything, and getting to be able to be around people that are friends and everything, and get to celebrate or have some rituals for remembrances of things or what have you. I think it's nice, like the communal aspect of it, I guess.
It's like, why just have atheism when you get spicy atheism? Each their own. I'm not trying to proselytize. I just think it's a funny saying. I'm just like, so in order to have like sex, you don't have to have BDSM involved, but some of us get our rocks off to that. So not everybody needs to like it.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think I'll wrap things up there. Is there anything, like any sources or anything that you'd like to cite, or anything you'd like to share?
I wish I would have prepared ahead of time. I definitely want to link Secular Therapy Project.
Okay.
I'd love for the audience to check out Theremin Trees and some
Our
of his
artwork
videos.
is by Jamie Coptic.
Is God a
You can check out
narcissist,
the
or
rest
is
of
he
their
the
work
original
at
Karen?
jamiecoptic.studio.
Because I think that would explain a lot.
Our music is by
before
Bridge
we
City
talk
Centers,
about
through and
NPD
through,
as a
and you
disorder
can find them at
versus the character of God
bridgecitycenters.com.
and what evangelicalism
If
is
you like our
becoming.
content,
Like so
please
many
like
of
and
these
subscribe
topics
to us on
are
YouTube,
harsh, so
and
I
donate
think he'd
to
be
us
a really
at
good
paypal.me
Yeah, I agree.
/skeptical
And
Satanist.
you have
Hate mail, death threats, and fan mail, send that to JesusChristAlmighty@hotmail.com.
I do,
Get a hold of us
but
on
I'll
Facebook.
link
Whatever you
their
do,
Okay, that
on
works.
this YouTube channel, help liking and
This
subscribing
weekend.
Okay.
to keep up on all of our content.
Yeah, we'll put those up whenever you get to them. And thanks for being on. And
No worries.
hail yourself. Hail Satan.
They'll hate.